I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. The rise in ransomware attacks throughout the industrial sector has led to a surge in another related activity, the purchasing of cyber insurance to help soften the blow of these attacks. But today's guest emphasizes that beyond just insurance to cover the costs of these intrusions, the manufacturing sector needs to implement more proactive strategies that encompass prevention and recovery. I'm pleased to welcome Alan Jenkins, Vice President of Cybersecurity Consulting at Intervision, to this episode of Security Breach. Intervision is a leading provider of services focused on enterprise and network security. Alan, thanks so much for joining us today. We've heard people talk about double-factor authentication, sort of zero trust strategies, and also just some different things revolving around passwords and being smarter with that. What's your take there? Some things that you've seen, so maybe some of the low-hanging fruit that can shore up some of these basic low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities, I guess?
Yeah, we sort of refer to that as like cyber hygiene. So, the things that you do, like you and I, we brush our teeth every day because I don't want to have to go to the dentist and have a bad thing happen to me. The same sort of thing is true in technology and specifically with cyber. So things like you mentioned, like with passwords, they're super critical, but bad password habits. So people who use a simple password or a short password or reuse the password over and over for multiple services, that's a really bad thing to do. All I've got to do is use my corporate password for, say, Netflix and Amazon. And if Netflix or Amazon has a problem, guess what? Then maybe somebody can also get into my corporate environment. So good cyber hygiene, those sorts of things are important. There's a lot of misinformation or confused information around passwords just by themselves. So for years, we were told to use passwords that had special characters, uppercase, lowercase, and whatnot. But NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, just a few years ago, came out with a document that said you really shouldn't do those things. What really matters is making longer passwords. The longer the password, the harder it is to crack, which is interesting because it was NIST originally that said we should use uppercase, lowercase, all those sorts of things. But these are people who are constantly in labs doing studies, and they've determined that there's a better practice. But those sorts of things are confusing because for years we've been telling people to use uppercase, lowercase, and now we're saying maybe that's not as important, make a long password. Then things like multi-factor are super important. One of the really low-hanging fruit that we see a lot is not maintaining a good hygiene with, say, your database of users. So if you're a company of, let's say, 10 people and 2 of those people leave, the good practice would be to get them out of your database so they no longer have a way to get in. But we find all the time when we work with people that that's just something that doesn't happen regularly. So that's low-hanging fruit. These are easy things to deal with, but they're also easy for us to skip by and not handle. So those give people a backdoor or an easier way to get into the environment.
I'm glad you brought that last one about getting rid of those old records, because that's something we hear about a lot, actually. That is something that people take advantage of. Either somebody gets miffed, they circle back and see if their logins still work, they sell them, something like that. So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. What you're talking about is a lot of proactive measures, but we're also hearing a lot of talk about cybersecurity response plans. And one of the things that was brought up in our dialogue back and forth is ransomware protection as a service. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that, how it fits into response plans, and some of your experiences with both.
Sure. So part of my role is working with customers to proactively plan, so really to keep bad things from happening to them is how I like to call it. The other side is bad things do happen. So we also run an incident response process. Good, bad, or indifferent, we've learned a lot through doing those things about how bad things happen, how to recover from those bad things. So we put together a program that we call RPAS, which is Ransomware Protection as a Service. And it really is a layered approach. It's people, process, and technology. One of the sad things that we've seen on some of these incident calls when we get called in is we'll have people who say, well, we spent so much money on security technology, we're confused as to how we could have been attacked and successfully. But the challenge that we see is maybe you have all this technology, but you don't have people who are trained on how to use the technology, or you don't have people who are around the clock 24/7, 365 watching the technology and managing the technology. Believe it or not, the bad guys don't clock out at 5 and go home. So, a lot of the incidents that we've been a part of and that we've seen, they come in at exactly when you don't want them to. Holidays, weekends, Thursday afternoons are particularly busy. So those sorts of things have led us to learn a little bit about how to respond. So making sure that we've got a good blend of people and processes to go along with technology. And with the RPAS bundle, the three layers beyond the people, process, and technology that we've snapped together is really taking important strides towards putting a first layer in that is a security operations center service. So really providing eyes in the sky. Then we build another layer after that. So that's going to stop or catch things before they spread to make us really sick at the customer. But occasionally something may get around the perimeter there. We're smart enough to realize that. So we also build the next layer is around disaster recovery planning. So if something gets by, can we not only contain it, but can we rapidly recover and get our customer back into business quickly? Because that downtime costs real money. At the same time, we can't just put them back into business, because if we restore data back over a compromised device, we could be tampering with a crime scene. So we need to leave things intact for forensics and investigations. So our disaster recovery process takes all of that into consequence, so we can plan out how to do those things. And then the last piece of the puzzle, so we've got the SOC piece, the disaster recovery. We put a wrapper around all of that with what we call a virtual CISO service, which is a Chief Information Security Officer. What we aim to do there is we really want to have somebody who becomes part of that customer environment and can help advise them through their entire security journey. So where do we see things that are happening now that maybe the customer should plan for? What do we learn from all the telemetry that we gather through these tools, and how can we use that to make a better environment? So taking those three pieces and tying them together, we really hope to be able to protect and defend our customers much better.
Now, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to hear about the different tiers, as well as the sort of the forensic part of it, and figuring out what did indeed happen, so we can understand how to be better going forward in preventing some of these attacks. When you're working with people, Alan, is there something that you see that they typically miss when they're putting together either the defensive plan or the response plan?
Wow, we see a lot of things. I don't know if we see a common thread. I think a lot of it comes back to some of that security hygiene being missed that we talked about before. Changes that you would normally expect to happen in an environment that just don't happen. Maybe a good example is we had a school system that was compromised, and we were trying to put them back together. So we were going back through their backups, and this compromise happened September or October. The last good backup was from January. So if you think about, well, what happens between January and September, you have people who graduate and leave and whatnot. So a lot of manual processes to put that sort of thing back together. So not testing backups, a simple thing, right? But it's taken for granted. So a lot of the times, the things that we see missed are some of those basic hygiene things. And I don't blame people. People are busy, right? So they're trying to keep the lights on, keep the business running. But some of those simple things are the things that get forgotten or don't get dealt with. Incident response plans in general. A lot of people we talk to, they just don't have them. They haven't developed them, or they don't test them, which is something that we stay really busy doing, to be super candid, is we do a lot of what we call tabletop exercises, where we simulate an incident with a customer, and we just walk through, not technically actually affecting the environment, but working with them to determine, well, how would you respond? Who would do what, when, how, that sort of thing. And we can learn a lot from that 4 to 8 hour exercise that we can use to help improve the environment moving forward.
Makes a lot of sense. I want to hear more about what Intervision does, but before I do that, I have to put you on the spot a little bit. When it comes to ransomware attacks, what's your take? I mean, we've talked about the insurance component of it and the response plan. A lot of times people are stuck and they end up paying the ransom. What's your take? Do you advise people to pay or to hold out and not pay?
Well, I wouldn't advise anybody to pay, right? Because we're at that point, we're funding a criminal enterprise. However, I live in the real world, and so sometimes a customer just may not have any other alternative. The silver bullet, if there is one, is the ability to recover your data. But if your data hasn't been backed up, or if your backups have become encrypted by the threat actors, that can leave you in a tentative spot. And at the end of the day, we're talking about business resilience. So, if you as a business owner are looking at, well, how much does it cost to pay the ransom versus how much does it cost me to not be able to do business? You've got a real business decision to make there. And we do a lot of work with insurance organizations and with legal firms to walk through that. So we leave those decisions to those folks. At the end of the day, we're there to be, to provide advice and services to help them with whichever direction they go through.
This makes sense. So tell us a little bit more about Intervision, some of the work you guys do, and the people that you work with.
Sure. So Intervision is a strategic services provider. We're across the entire country. We've got offices from Virginia all the way to California. We really do design, deploy, and manage technology for customers. So oftentimes they need help to conduct their business in the technology footprint. And that's really where we step in. So our folks are specialists in networking, in cloud. In my little corner of the world, we're specialists in security. So really trying to be a partner with our customers so that they can conduct their business and not have to worry as much about the technology piece. Leave that to us.
Makes sense. Cybersecurity is such a global concern, a global issue, and manufacturing is becoming more an industry without borders, really. So one of the biggest things happening right now on a global perspective, or from a global perspective, are the events in Ukraine with the Russian invasion and the things going on there. We've heard a lot of things going on between both parties in terms of using cyber as a weapon. Do you see anything coming out of this conflict that could have an impact on everyday life here in the U.S. or the industrial sector specifically when it comes to becoming better at cybersecurity?
Well, there's a lot of activity is the thing. So if you ask me to point to one specific scenario or one specific breach, that might be harder to do. But if you look at sort of the larger footprint, one of the things that I was looking at just a day or two ago is there's some information showing that there's such an exodus of people from Russia right now. And that, of course, takes with it a lot of technology and cyber talent. So there's some rumors that the Russian government is now considering renting technology and cyber talent from prisoners. So people who they have incarcerated who have those talents may get pulled in and rented to corporate entities because there just aren't enough people to help them do that work. That's really interesting, and it's a little twisted, but it is what it is. That's a byproduct of what is happening there. Another interesting concept there is that a number of the Russian threat actor groups like REvil were affected at the end of last year, I believe, and the U.S. and the Russians had gotten together and sort of decided we're going to put some of these folks out of business. But I think it was effective in April when during the Ukraine encounter, the U.S. walked away from any of the negotiations with the Russian group on that. So that affects some of those groups. And in fact, there's some information going around now that REvil is actually coming back into business. And that was one of the top threat actors out there that was performing ransomware, providing ransomware as a service to others to use. So, that doesn't point to a specific incident, but it does point to maybe a global issue that we may have to deal with moving forward.
Well, I think that is interesting. That's something we've covered as well, is sort of that exodus of IT talent out of Russia, where these folks were going to go and what kind of gaps that would potentially open up. So it's interesting. I think some would argue that hiring criminals to work for some of those Russian leaders is not that far of a departure. We'll stay away from that kind of commentary right now. But as we look even down the road, globally, close to home, all that, for the next 12 to 18 months, Alan, are there any trends that you're expecting to maybe see an uptick in, greater concerns that the industrial sector should be looking at?
I think the trends, we already see them, right? So, some of the things are, I really think we're going to see more regulation coming out of federal and then down to the state and local. And we see some of that with things like CMMC, with that providing some incentives for people to maybe shore up their security posture and their security programs. Things like the reporting rules that we're seeing, where if you have a breach, you really need to notify sooner so that you can see the trends across the industry. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. And some people look at that as a bad thing because it does impose some more activities on people who may be already strapped. But in the scheme of things, if you look at the intent really is to secure our environments more so. So I think those are in the long run probably a good thing, and it's definitely a trend that I think will continue. I also think we'll see more of the motion from on-premise activity into the cloud, and I think that also can be a good thing. But we've seen trends where when people move to the cloud, they sort of wash their hands and think, well, I don't have to care about the security or whatnot, and that's definitely not the case. You still have to care, and in fact, you may need to care more. But it's a different way of caring. So we can't put up a firewall now and say, okay, you can't get to my stuff. Your stuff's in the cloud. There's a different way of protecting it. We can put firewalls in the cloud, but there's other ways that we need to think about where we're putting our data, who's got access to the data. So I think those things will be important. And then maybe the last thing that comes to mind for me is just where we're putting our data. So you, me, every one of us, we've got how many accounts, how many things do we use, and where's that data going? And there's all kinds of rules out there about what you can do and what you can't do with that data. But we've seen that get misused over and over again. And for you or me or the average person, we don't typically read those documents that are 15, 20 pages long that say, click here if you're okay with our privacy policy. We click here because we want to move forward. But when we click there, we're giving away some rights around the privacy of our information. And I think we need to find ways for that to be easier for people like us to digest and understand. And we need to put some rules around what happens with that data and really put teeth in what happens if that data gets misused.
Thanks, Alan. For more information on the work Intervision does, you can go to www.intervision.com. Thanks for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. For Alan Jenkins, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.